In the news today, rumours abound that Penny Mordaunt will be strategically placed to replace with Weasel Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. The Telegraph, Daily Mail, Daily Express are all pushing the story and the narrative that Penny Mordaunt will be taking over at some stage before the general election. This has been denied, of course, by Esther McVey, the new Common Sense Minister. Also, Transport Minister Mark Harper were both wheeled out on GB News and Talk TV, respectively, to poo-poo the rumours that there is more internal squabbling, with the general election looking like it will be anywhere from June this year, 2024, until November. The odds and the chances of the Conservatives resurrecting themselves to win a majority in the House of Commons this year are slim to none. We are looking down the barrel of a Labour government gun. Either that or it will be a hung parliament in which the Labour Party will do a deal with the Scottish Nationalist Party. I mean, you can only have nightmares if you're a common sense thinker like herd immunity news viewers on the prospect of a Labour SNP coalition. It'd be absolutely hellish, to say the least. So, getting back to Penny Mordaunt, we don't think there's an appetite within the membership for another World Economic Forum puppet, ally and friend of Bill Gates to take over. Even for the Conservative normies who are sceptical of channels like ours, herd immunity news, people that talk about vaccine deaths, they talk about globalism, the influence of the World Economic Forum on our politicians. I'd say the majority are still of the mindset that democracy in this country does exist, although that group, that cohort is shrinking by the day. The Reform Party, of course, are making tremendous grounds after Lee Anderson left the Conservatives as the MP for Ashfield and joined Reform. He may well encourage 8 to 9 other Red Wall MPs to join him at the Reform Party, but that remains to be seen. But what is very loud and clear from the response that we've had today is that Penny Mordaunt replacing Rishi Sunak would be absolute insanity, as there really are two cheeks of the same backside, or as we say, they are two world economic peas in a pod. There's nothing really between them other than Penny does like holding a good sword. She's probably a foot taller than him, could take him in a fight. And she's really only known for her comments on transgenderism. We all know that she's pro-gay marriage. She's pro-transgenderism. She has come out and said that trans women are actually women, trans men are men. Absolute nonsense, insanity personified in these comments, and it just shows you where her mind is at. But her alliances with Bill Gates that we've touched on via X in 2018, where her and the eugenicist Gates were talking about technology and farming and how we can get more from our meat. You wouldn't let Bill Gates near the cat if you had a brain cell on active duty. This man is a eugenicist, and there is no doubt about that. Currently, he's using his vast fortune to buy up farmlands to restrict food production throughout Western world. We all know he funds the World Health Organization. He is the largest funder of the World Health Organization, and it's the WHO treaties that are being pushed in every country in the free West, from United States, UK, throughout the EU states, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. These diktats are going to be thrust upon us. And Penny Mordaunt, of course, is all on board with these. She's probably the worst person that could be Prime Minister in this country. We thought of maybe 3 or 4 others. Grant Shapps was one, the hapless, tiny pyramid scheme, timeshare, con artist who's now our Minister of Defence. God help us, and God help anyone serving in the armed forces to have Shapps in charge. The second one is Tobias, 77th Brigade, Elwood, a warmonger of the highest degree, an absolute psychopath in our book. No one should go near his house. No one should touch a hair on that man's head. Leave him alone. Let him spout his garbage. Let him continue his warmongering, and enough people will catch him out and he will be discarded into the dustbin of history. The other person that we thought may be worse than Miss Mordaunt is Jeremy Hunt, the World Economic Forum weasel personified, and his links to all the globalists throughout the world, from the Bilderberg Group to the World Economic Forum. He's one of Klaus Schwab's closest allies. And when Schwab talks about penetrating every cabinet in the world, I'm sure that he has penetrated Jeremy Hunt, at least politically, and we'll go no further than that. But there is something very, very strange about Jeremy Hunt indeed. And the fact that Liz Truss actually appointed him as Chancellor is just unbelievable, that she would think that this position, this move to bring Jeremy Hunt in, would keep the one nation Conservatives happy is just absolutely laughable. So the party's finished. It's done. If it was a horse, it would be put out of its misery and shot. If it was a building, it would be condemned because it's rotten throughout to its core. The Reform Party may well finish it off, and MPs are leaving. So we hear, and so we've seen. They're resigning, they're not coming back. The 80-seat majority that Boris Johnson presented and won in 2019, not that we're Boris Johnson fans, of course, we can't stand the man, but because we place him responsible for so much damage that has been done, from the lockdowns to the mandatory positions he took on COVID vaccinations without having a clue about them. So we're not interested in Boris Johnson at all. But he did deliver an 80-seat majority. He was elected the leader. He was given a mandate by the British people. Rishi Sunak cannot be accused of doing any of those things as a placed minister. Basically, from his joining the party, Rishi Sunak bought his seat off William Hague. That was the seat of Richmond. After that, he slid his way up the slippery slope. Having a billionaire father-in-law doesn't do any harm to anyone's career prospects, and he found himself in a position where he was ready to borrow £500 billion and bankrupt this country as the Chancellor of the Exchequer, with his complete disastrous policies from the furlough scheme to the eat out to help out. We still have 15 billion missing, of course, from Sunak's time in office. He hasn't stopped the boats. Small boats are still coming. Under his tenure and administration, we've had net migration of 720,000. Between him and James Cleverly, they're boasting of getting it down to 450,000. Absolute insane numbers. He can't stop the boats. He can't control the police force. Can't stop the NHS strike action. He's trying to claim responsibility for inflation going down to probably 2%, but that's the Bank of England's doing. Interest rates are still very high in this country. Mass immigration, of course, is having an impact upon every one of our services in this country. So to think that the Conservatives are going to save themselves from annihilation at the next election because they're bringing in Penny Mordaunt is laughable. It's insane. It's a distraction probably to the mess that the Conservatives have got themselves in. And it's a deflection onto and away from other matters like the COVID inquiry. The COVID inquiry has obviously kicked the can down the road on vaccine injuries and who is responsible for them. We may well never have a proper, full, just inquiry into this devastating act upon the British people from its government, seen across the world, of course, in America, European Union, and throughout. These acts were absolutely disgraceful. And the guilty parties, we can only hope and pray that they face justice sooner rather than later. But the appetite for Penny Mordaunt may well come after the devastating losses. She may well not even be an MP, to be honest with you. It's too late for the Conservatives to do anything now. We put a story out last July during the summer break to say that there was an uprising planned against Sunak. He was never the man. Of course, Conservative members weren't allowed to vote. They were taken out of the equation. Talk about democracy, and they're laughing at Putin today and calling his election a sham. Well, I think the Russian election is probably more authentic than the one that Rishi Sunak had to become leader and prime minister. He was given a free pass by the 1922 committee. Come on in, here you go, no competition. That's how you like it. Liz Truss obviously beat him in the head-to-head. Even Liz Truss was trusted more from the Conservative membership than Rishi Sunak. That's really telling. Truss is not a talented politician at all, not a great orator. She's dull, she's boring, she's bland, she's woeful, and Sunak couldn't even beat her. And it's laughable to think that anyone would want him as prime minister. We've met a couple, actually, and they're incredible individuals, but we won't go into that any further right now. So it's not going to happen. I would say there's rumours that the fractions, the groups, the splinters within the Conservative Party are going to try and put a candidate in before the election in a desperate attempt to try and save some seats in the red wall. There are still maybe 100 Tory safe seats. If they get between 100 and 150 seats, I'm sure they'll be happy deep down and secretly. There are other stories and pollsters saying that they're going to get closer to 200 seats. It would still be a complete annihilation from the 80 seats that we mentioned that Johnson got in 2019, the 80 seat majority that he got. To go down, to drop 160 seats or 100 seats would be completely disastrous, but that's what they can expect to do. And of course, they can expect this because they haven't been true to their word. They didn't see Brexit through. They are not interested in battling against the civil service that is completely removing parliamentary sovereignty and national sovereignty. The war in Ukraine has been a complete disaster. The funding for this has been woeful, absolutely pathetic. Of course, they're following sleepy Joe Biden all the way to the graves. We have 500,000 people dead in Ukraine, and we may well see another 500,000 more die. Where those people are going to come from, we don't know, because in Ukraine, of course, they're trying to conscript elders. They're trying to conscript women and very young people into the armed forces. No one's interested, as they were before, because it's a killing zone. It's a meat grinder. Let's see what happens, because the Conservatives really are a dead man walking. They are fit for the gallows. They are ready to be culled. And there are other parties out there that can make hay out of this. Obviously, Labour are looking to do very well out of this and take the reins of government. Keir Starmer's going to be in 10 Downing Street. There's very little that could change that. Now, there are opportunities for disenchanted Labour voters for the Workers' Party, which George Galloway leads. The Rochdale MP has a very strong platform for perhaps up to 20 constituencies that have obviously a large working class, large Muslim population. Many people have jumped on George Galloway to say that he's taken advantage, of course, because of the war in Ukraine and the large support mechanisms there are within the Muslim community for Gaza and for the genocide that's going on there. That single issue can be enough to take George Galloway, to give him maybe another 10 MPs. It depends on the charge and the candidates and the quality of those candidates that he has. He could get 10 MPs. He's already had electoral success where the Reform Party has not. They've taken on board Lee Anderson, but Lee was elected as a Conservative. So far, the closest person to come to winning a seat at a by-election was Ben Habib in Wellingbourne. So in Wellingborough, Ben Habib got about 13% of the vote, which was an incredible effort. I think Robert Lowe in another by-election, he got about 10%, but they're still very, very wide of the mark. And Ben may well be the best candidate. Ben Habib is someone that we've interviewed and we've got a lot of respect for. So Reform do have a chance as well at getting a good few seats. Again, it just depends on the quality of the candidates they get. If they go with the candidates like they had for the Rochdale election, Martin Dansky, they're going to fall flat on their arse, and Richard Tice is just going to take the party to mediocrity at best. They may get 1 or 2 seats, but not enough to make an impact. George Galloway has a chance, we think, to get even more seats than Reform because of his leadership. His oratory skills are second to none. We've already seen in the House of Parliament the 8-minute speech that he gave. Whether you love George Galloway, whether you can't stand the man, the 8 minutes that he gave in his maiden speech were incredible. And that's just for starters. Wait till he gets warmed up. If you are against war, like we are at Herd Immunity News, if you are against the unjust war, we should say, then you will be a massive supporter of Mr. Galloway, because like Andrew Bridgen was for the vaccine injured and vaccine deaths from the COVID-19 jabs, Mr. Galloway represents the loudest, strongest, and most educated and experienced voice when it comes to the tragedy of war and genocide that's going on right now. These insane people are pushing the Russian bear to the limits, and we can't back it up. The British government with sleepy Joe Biden got our asses kicked and thrown out of Afghanistan, or we handed it over to the Taliban, Qatar, and Chinese investors. That's the other way to look at it. But for anybody thinking that Penny Mordaunt is going to resurrect and rescue the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom, they're really up a gum tree. They're lost in translation. They are clueless. But we know there's not that many of you out there that really barrack for Penny Mordaunt. The Conservatives are done. They're dusted. They're a busted flush. It's time to move on. It's quite right that they be destroyed, so that from the ashes, perhaps an actual real Conservative option from their party or Reform or another organisation will come out of the disaster zone that will be the 2024 general election for the Conservative Party.